The great hall of Ashvale had never been so quiet. Hundreds of wolves stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the carved stone arches, and not one of them dared to breathe too loudly. At the center of the hall stood King Roran, alpha of the Ashvale pack, tall and unmoving, his face carved from the same cold stone as the walls around him. Across from him stood Princess Wren Calloway, heir to the Calloway bloodline, her chin lifted even as her hands trembled at her sides. 3 months earlier, the two of them had stood in that same hall and felt the mate bond snap into place between them, sudden and undeniable, the way the moon pulls the tide. Every wolf in the kingdom had seen it happen. The bond had glowed faintly gold in the air between them, a sign that had not been seen in Ashvale for 2 generations. It should have been a night of celebration. Now Roran was about to end it. His council had spent weeks whispering in his ear. Lady Isolde, a noblewoman, with a smile like honey and a heart like ice, had brought him letters that seemed to prove the Calloway bloodline had once betrayed his father. The letters were old and faded, and Roran had been too tired, too grieving, too afraid of history repeating itself, to look closely enough to see they were forged. He believed them, that was his mistake, though he would not understand the size of it until much later. Wren Calloway, he said, his voice steady, even as something inside his chest screamed at him to stop. Before this pack and by the old right, I release the bond between us. A gasp rippled through the hall. Elder Cassian, the keeper of pack law, stepped forward with his hand raised, but it was too late. Roran had already spoken the words. The old right did not forgive hesitation. Wren felt it before she understood it. A tearing sensation, deep in her chest, as though someone had reached inside her and pulled a thread loose from her very soul. She staggered, and 2 of her guards caught her before she fell. Her wolf, usually calm and steady beneath her skin, let out a silent howl of pain that only she could hear. She looked up at Roran through the haze of it, and for one moment, she saw something flicker across his face. Regret, maybe, or fear. But he did not take the words back. A king could not take back a right spoken before his pack. That was the law, and he had built his life around never breaking it. "You will regret this," Wren said, her voice shaking but clear enough for the whole hall to hear. "Not because I curse you, but because some things, once broken, cannot be mended by wanting them back." She turned and left the hall before he could answer, her guards close behind her, and she did not look back once. The journey home to her father's kingdom took 3 days. Wren spent most of it staring out the carriage window, watching the forests blur past, refusing to cry in front of anyone. She had been raised to believe that royal wolves did not show weakness, not even in grief. But at night, alone in her tent, she pressed a hand to her chest where the bond used to be, and felt only a hollow ache where warmth used to live. Her father, King Aldrich Calloway, was furious in a way she had never seen before. He paced his war room for hours, his wolf pushing so close to the surface that his eyes flashed gold every time he spoke Roran's name. He wanted war. He wanted to march on Ashvale and remind them what it meant to insult a Calloway princess in front of her own pack. Wren should have wanted the same thing. Instead, she found herself strangely tired, the anger burning low and slow instead of bright and hot. She told herself it was because she was still weak from the broken bond. She told herself many things over the following weeks that were not entirely true. What she did not tell anyone, not even her father, was that her wolf had not accepted the ending. Even broken, even torn, some invisible thread still stretched all the way back to Ashvale, thin and aching, refusing to snap completely. In Ashvale, Roran was falling apart in ways no one outside his closest guards could see. At first it was small. He lost his temper faster than usual. He stopped sleeping through the night. His shifts into wolf form, once smooth and effortless, became jagged and painful, as though his own body no longer trusted him. Elder Cassian watched all of this with growing concern, and one evening, he finally sat the king down in his private study and told him something Roran did not want to hear. "Royal bonds are not like the bonds of ordinary wolves," Cassian said, his old eyes steady on the king's face. "When 2 heirs are fated, the bond roots itself deeper than the right accounts for. You did not end it, Roran. You only tore it, and a torn bond does not heal on its own. It festers." "Then how do I end it properly?" Roran asked. though even as he said it, something in his voice did not sound convinced he wanted to. "You cannot," Cassian said simply, "not through law, only through her. The right that severs can only be undone by choice, freely given, by both wolves. Force cannot do what you already tried to force once." Roran said nothing for a long while. Outside his window, the moon hung low and full, and somewhere far away, he swore he could feel a faint pull toward the east, toward the Calloway lands, toward her. He did not yet know that Ren felt the same pull toward him, and that neither of them wanted to admit it. Lady Isolde noticed the change in the king before anyone else did, and she did not like it. She had spent months positioning herself as his closest advisor, hoping that with the Calloway bond broken, she might one day take Ren's place. She was patient, and she was clever, and when she saw Roran growing weaker instead of moving on, she grew afraid that her plan was slipping away from her. So she pushed harder. She brought him proposals for a political marriage with a neighboring pack. She reminded him constantly of duty, of legacy, of the danger of appearing weak in front of his council. She never once mentioned that the letters she had shown him were forgeries, carefully aged and carefully placed in his path. But secrets have a way of loosening their own threads, especially when someone is desperate enough to protect them. Isolde had also been quietly working to weaken the older pack elders who might have questioned her rise, feeding them tonics she claimed were for their health but that instead left them tired and confused, easier to control. It was a small cruelty compared to what she believed she deserved, and she told herself it was necessary. She did not expect Ren to find out. It was one of Ren's own cousins, a young wolf who had been sent to Ashvale as part of a diplomatic exchange years before, who first noticed something wrong with the elders and wrote to Ren about it. Curious despite herself, and grateful for something to focus on besides the ache in her chest, Ren began quietly gathering information. What she found chilled her. The same handwriting that had appeared on the forged letters accusing her family of betrayal matched notes found in Isolde's private correspondence. The timing lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. Isolde had manufactured the entire scandal that led Roran to break their bond, and she had done it to clear a path for herself. Ren sat with this knowledge for 3 days before deciding what to do with it. Part of her wanted to let Roran suffer the consequences of trusting the wrong person. Part of her wanted to march into Ashvale herself and demand answers, but a larger part of her, the part connected to that thin, stubborn thread still stretching across the miles between them, could not stand the thought of watching an innocent kingdom suffer under a scheming hand, while the truth stayed hidden. She brought the evidence to her father, expecting him to use it as justification for war. Instead, he studied it carefully, and then looked at his daughter with an expression she had not seen from him in a long time. "What do you want to do, Ren?" he asked. "Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want?" She did not answer right away, but that night, alone in her room, she finally let herself cry, not for the bond that had been broken, but for how much she still wanted it whole. Word of Calloway, soldiers gathering near the border, reached Roran within days. His council urged him to prepare for war, and for the first time in months, he refused to listen to Isolde's advice at all. Something about the timing felt wrong to him, a suspicion he could not fully explain even to himself. He rode out alone, against the pleading of his guards, toward the border of the two kingdoms. He told himself he was going to prevent a war. He did not let himself admit, not fully, that he was also going because some part of him needed to see Ren again before anything else happened, whatever the cost. They met at the edge of the Moon Grove, the sacred place where mate bonds were traditionally sealed, halfway between their two kingdoms. Ren had ridden out with her own small guard, carrying the evidence of Isolde's betrayal, intending only to hand it over and leave. She had not expected to see Roran himself waiting there, alone, without his armor, without his crown, looking nothing like the king who had broken her in front of his entire pack. "You came without an army," she said, keeping her voice cool even as her heart pounded. "I came to stop one," he answered. "And to tell you the truth, whatever it costs me." He told her everything. The forged letters, Isolde's manipulation, his own fear and grief after his father's death, which had made him too willing to believe the worst about a bloodline he barely knew, simply because it was easier than trusting something as fragile as a bond he had not asked for, but had already come to depend on. "I was wrong," he said, and the words seemed to cost him more than any battle ever had. "Not just about the letters, about breaking the bond. I told myself I did it to protect my kingdom, but the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of losing control the way my father did before he died. I thought if I broke the bond first, it could not break me later." Ren listened in silence, her wolf pacing restlessly beneath her skin, torn between the pride that told her to walk away and the thread that still pulled her toward him no matter how far she went. "You hurt me," she said quietly, "in front of everyone. You cannot simply undo that with an apology in a forest." "I know," Roran said. "I am not asking you to forgive me because I said the right words. I am asking you to choose, freely, whatever that choice turns out to be. Elder Cassian told me the bond cannot be forced back together, only chosen. So I am not here to command anything. I am here because I could not stay away, and because you deserve the truth even if you never want to see me again after hearing it." Behind them, drawn by the news of the meeting, wolves from both kingdoms had begun to gather at the edges of the grove, kept back by careful guards but close enough to see and hear. It was not the plan either of them had intended, but there was no undoing it now. Roran knelt before her, right there in the grove, in front of both packs. It was not a gesture any Alpha King had made in living memory. He tilted his head to the side, baring his throat, the oldest sign of submission a wolf could offer. "I release my crown's pride," he said, loud enough for both packs to hear. "I do not ask you to take me back. I only ask you to know that whatever you choose, it will be your choice, not mine, not law, not politics. I am done trying to control what was never mine to control." Ren stood very still. She could feel her wolf straining forward, could feel the old bond humming faintly in the space between them, waiting. She thought of the humiliation in the great hall, of the weeks of pain, of the anger she had carried across 3 days of travel. And she thought, too, of the letters, the truth Isolde had buried, and the boy. Because in that moment, kneeling in the grass, he looked more like a frightened boy than a king, who had finally chosen honesty over pride. She stepped forward. Her wolf did not wait for her permission. It surged forward on its own, ancient and certain in a way her human heart was still catching up to, and completed the old rite there in the grove, sealing the bond not through law, not through ceremony, but through choice. A soft golden light rose between them once more, brighter than before, settling over the clearing like the first light of morning. A murmur swept through both packs, disbelief turning slowly into quiet wonder. Isolde's schemes unraveled within days, once the evidence reached Ashvale's council. She was stripped of her title and exiled from the kingdom, and the elders she had weakened were given proper care and began, slowly, to recover. The two kingdoms did not go to war. Instead, in the weeks that followed, they began the long, careful work of becoming allies, then something closer to family. Roran and Ren stood together before their combined pack when the alliance was formally sealed, not as a conquered princess and a commanding king, but as equals who had chosen each other twice, once by fate, and once, harder and more honestly, by will. The bond between them, tested and torn and finally rebuilt, held stronger than either of them could have imagined, not because it had never broken, but because when it mattered most, it had been chosen again, freely, before the whole pack, and neither of them ever let it go after that.